Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Frost Sullivan's Cybersecurity Growth Webinar. Our growth webinars bring together industry leaders and innovators to explore emerging cybersecurity trends and strategies that drive business resilience and growth. Today's session, we are going to focus on how automation is transforming compliance, helping compliance, risk, and security leaders enhance efficiency, improve visibility, and turn compliance from a regulatory requirement into a strategic advantage. My name is Vivian Phua. I'm a senior industry analyst for the cybersecurity program, and I will be the moderator for today's webinar. Also with me today are Eva Kitas from Toropass. Eva is a co-founder as well as the president and chief customer officer of Toropass, leading customer experience and internal operations at the company. Before Toropass, Eva founded GRC, a boutique consulting firm after more than 20 years of career at Citigroup, where she was the managing director, leading IT control, compliance, and vendor management. She's also a graduate of NYU's Stern School of Business and has a passion for supporting women's professional growth initiatives. Joining us today from CyberSense is Matt Alderman. Matt is the Chief Product Officer at CyberSense Security and is an information security, compliance, and risk veteran with over 25 years of experience designing and implementing solutions. Matt has held various executive leadership roles, including Chief Executive Officer of Security Weekly, which was acquired by Cyber Risk Alliance in 2020, Chief Strategy and Marketing Officer at Layered Insights, which was acquired by Qualys in 2018, and VP of Strategy at Tenable. Rounding out our panel today is Yael Solo from Centralize. Yael is a cybersecurity and technology entrepreneur with extensive experience in governance, risk, and compliance. Currently, he serves as the founder and CEO of Centralize, a leading SaaS platform that simplifies and automates cyber risk management for enterprises. Previously, Yael held the role of Vice President at Visa, where he gained deep expertise in financial technology, regulatory compliance, and global risk management strategies. Once again, thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, before we begin the panel discussion, I'd like to take a few minutes to provide some context for today's topic by sharing a few key research findings from Frost & Sullivan. So in my short presentation, I will focus on these three main areas. First, the growing adoption of AI in risk and compliance. Second, the key concerns and challenges CISOs face today. And third, key goals of compliance automation. So together, these three areas set the foundation for our discussion today on how automation is transforming compliance into a strategic enabler for business growth and resilience. Now, to set the stage, let's look at how organizations are embracing AI and automation to support their business and compliance priorities. According to Frost & Sullivan's State of the Cloud 2025 survey, we interviewed more than 700 of IT decision makers that actively involved in the purchase of IT infrastructure, software, or cloud services at their organizations. So according to this recent survey, you can see that 62% of organizations view AI or machine learning as vital to achieving their business priorities. I mean, this reflects how AI has evolved beyond just analytics. It's now central to improving efficiency, decision-making, and risk management. And on the right side, you can see that 74% of organizations already use or plan to use AI in risk and compliance within the next 2 years. This, again, signals a clear trend. AI adoption in compliance is accelerating quickly, driven by the need for faster insights, real-time visibility, and greater automation. So now that we've seen how AI adoption is accelerating across risk and compliance, we must understand that today many CISOs are encountering new challenges, and this makes the shift towards automation even more urgent. So according to Frost and Sullivan's recent research, we've identified key areas for CISOs as the balance of compliance, risk, and operational demands. So the first concern we see is that the overlapping regulations and expanding compliance landscape. Very often, many organizations, they will need to, handling multiple frameworks across different jurisdictions. And next, audit burden and compliance gaps. We also see repetitive manual audit preparation. All these continue to drain resources and expose inefficiencies. The challenges in audit-ready evidence gathering, especially when gathering evidence across multiple systems is still heavily manual. Next, resource constraints and operational pressures. Very often we see compliance teams are understaffed and they will need to juggle between multiple priorities within limited bandwidth. Next, budget constraints. Despite growing compliance expectations, many CISOs they still face tightening budgets that limit technology spend. On the technology front, we see that very often CISOs also face the challenges around integration gaps due to tool fragmentation. Next, risk management and visibility. We see that many organizations, they still lack a single real-time view of risk exposure and control effectiveness. Last but not least, third-party and AI governance concerns, especially when organizations rely more on vendors and AI-driven tools. Ensuring transparency and accountability becomes even more complex. So these challenges underscore the urgent need for automation. And that's exactly what compliance automation aims to address, which brings us to my final slide. On this slide, we will explore 5 key goals driving the adoption of compliance automation today. First, control automation. It aims to reduce manual effort by automatically testing and validating controls. Next, audit readiness helps to keep compliance records continuously updated and audit ready. Next, remediation orchestration. It helps to coordinate issue resolution across teams to maintain compliance continuity. Next, compliance insights and reporting. It helps to provide real-time visibility into compliance status, risk exposure, and control effectiveness. Lastly, risk management. It aims to strengthen overall compliance posture by aligning risk, controls, and business impact. So these goals illustrate how compliance automation aims to enhance accuracy, audit readiness, and real-time visibility. Setting the stage for our panel discussion on how organizations are going to put these capabilities into practice. To start, let's explore how automation is transforming the way organizations approach governance and compliance. As what we discussed earlier in my presentation, we see that organizations they face growing complexity in compliance obligations across multiple jurisdictions. Many of them are finding that traditional governance, risk, and compliance GRC platforms can no longer provide the real-time visibility or scalability they need. So this growing gap has driven the emergence of compliance automation platforms. So to start our discussion, I would like to hear from our panel today on how's the rise of compliance automation reshaping the traditional GRC landscape. Is compliance automation going to replace or extend existing GRC capabilities? Eva, why don't we start with you first?
Yes, great. Thank you, Vivian. I think that's a great question. And I'd say that compliance automation is actually doing both. I think it's extending and over time will be reshaping the traditional GRC landscape. I think first it's really an extension because automation is pushing the GRC capabilities down market and has over the last many years. So it's helping smaller organizations enforce like baseline hygiene, unlock new commercial opportunities that used to be reserved for big enterprises. And when we started 6.5 years ago, ThoroughPass, that was the case. But what we're also starting to see now is market pressure for replacement. Traditional GRC platforms, they need to embed, more real-time automation into their core, and they don't exist today. they're going to be risk being really disrupted by newer, more agile vendors, right, who specialize in this. And I think the other thing, having said that, I think the near-term scenario is coexistence. I think automation isn't replacing tools like Archer or ServiceNow or OneTrust, for example. Instead, it's taking out these like tedious, high like ROI workflows is what I would say. Things like automated control monitoring, and you touched upon that earlier, and managing potentially like security questionnaires and the like as they work with their third parties. So that's how I see it. I really do think it's both.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Because I agree with her.
Yeah, I was about to ask you. Yeah.
Yeah,
How do you think? Do you think compliance automation will coexist with legacy GRC tools or eventually replace them? What's your view on this?
Yeah, so I agree with Eva. It's doing a little bit of both. And here's the reason, right? I spent 2.5 years at Archer. I built one of the first GRC platforms out there almost 20 years ago now. We never accounted for this type of scale in these platforms when we built them, right? Back then, we thought automation was workflow automation. We could workflow everything. That's not the case, right? So a lot of the existing legacy GRC systems can't scale to consume literally tens of millions of data points, because that's what we're talking about, right? On a large scale. And so, but the legacy GRCs have capabilities in them. At least we're not focused on at CyberSync, right? I'm not interested in reg change and policy and some of these other ancillaries. So the systems have to coexist for a while, in that the legacy GRCs are going to do certain things that companies still need, but they're going to augment them with automated systems to gain efficiencies, and they're going to have to coexist. Will they eventually kind of replace legacy GRCs? Probably. But there's still there's still some innovation that can be done with some of these newer vendors that will allow us to replace some of those old legacy capabilities that the GRC systems have.
Yeah, maybe I'll just jump in here. I think that I agree with Matt's point there, that there's going to be a period now where they're going to go coexist and go side by side. I think ultimately, I don't think they're going to replace them. I think they're going to merge into one, and that's really what's going to happen. So I think that these larger GRC players are starting to recognize the fact that they're deficient in these areas, in particular in the digital risk space. And that's, I think, where all the people at the panel today are really very focused. I think each of us have a little bit of a different focus in terms of exactly what we're focusing on, and some overlap. But at the end of the day, we're actually very focused on that convergence of the multiple use cases a little bit more, and probably a little bit less just on the compliance automation piece there from that perspective. And we're really trying to bring that risk and compliance world into one, to really take that to that next level. Because I think at the end of the day, what we all understand is that the underlying data here is a common source of data. And there's a ton of inefficiency today in that collection process that happens. And that's why connecting tools now, and then connecting also the data from different use cases so that it can have a single source of truth that's feeding all this, is extremely valuable. And I think that what we're all doing here is actually building the building blocks for the future of the GRC market, as I see it.
Thank you for all the great insights. We definitely see compliance automation are going to coexist with your capabilities, or in some cases complement the existing capabilities that GRC tools have right now in the near term. Now that brings us to another important aspect: the integration challenges organizations face when implementing compliance automation solutions, because we understand that many organizations, they still operate in hybrid and legacy environments, and a lot of times compliance processes are fragmented across multiple systems. They still have spreadsheets, manual workflows. So integrating new automation platforms within these existing environments often becomes one of the biggest barriers for them to adopt the compliance automation solution. So my next question is, how do you see how can organizations overcome these challenges when embedding compliance automation into legacy or hybrid infrastructures? This time, Matt, why don't we start with you first?
Was that me? Sorry.
Yeah, Vivian, you're coming in. You're a little bit broken up, but Matt, why don't you just go ahead and jump in?
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
that's you, Matt.
yeah. I mean, this has been a challenge for a long time, right? It's great when you have systems in the cloud that you can just API into and pull the data out and automate. But you're right, we still have a lot of hybrid systems. So how do we address that? And we've seen different techniques, right? We've seen the ability for customers to push data. Our approach has been to create a standardized schema for data to go into. That way you can either pull the data in, you can push the data in, but once you get it into that standardized schema format, then all of our automation, all of our scoring, all the things that we do just works, right? And that's kind of bridging the gap between hybrid systems. But we've also started to look at other techniques, right? Not everything's available as an API. There's systems out there, believe it or not, large companies that have a huge footprint actually don't have APIs into some of this data, okay? And so how do you get that data out? We've looked at other techniques of how do you consume report data? How do you take documents and parse those documents and look at those documents and use that to auto score controls, right? And so we've also done evidence collection bots where they go in and they log into these systems and they take screenshots, and then we parse those screenshots to automate controls. So it's not just one technique anymore. It's multiple techniques that we can now use together to actually start to pull together data from different systems in different ways, whether it's API telemetry, whether it's documents or reports, or whether it's screenshot data. And it's going to be a mix of these techniques that actually allow you to get more and more coverage in your automation story.
Great. That's a great example. Eva, why don't we, what's your take on this? How do you see enterprises addressing integration challenges at scale?
Yeah, it's very interesting because it is a common challenge that we definitely see. And companies are absolutely working in hybrid environments. And you know, from our point of view, the problem that we're solving is really creating continuous monitoring and automating compliance like real time, but also really pushing that through to the audit, because ultimately companies want the audit, the certification. And so we're trying to bridge those building blocks, if you will. So you have sort of more of a straight through audit process. And what I would say is we still see compliance spread across, you know, multiple tools, spreadsheets, and systems. And that's the biggest challenge. And so for us, you know, what we see working for larger enterprises is to start small, like prove and then scale. Like it's really important to have some proof points, right, that are working in a large enterprise, in an organization. Show clear value without disruption, because that disruption could be real in a large enterprise that is very, you know, used to operating a certain way. And so just managing that. And then, you know, for us, the way, you know, we think about this change is, you know, don't underestimate the value of a partnership, because find true partners, right? Who, not just software vendors, people who are going to work alongside you during the implementation is really important, right? Support, you know, your adoption in the company, help showcase your early wins, right? So that collaboration is really important. It makes a difference between a tool, right, that's installed and a solution that's more embraced in the company. And that's what we're trying to do with our customers, because change is hard, and these are hard things. And of course, I can't also underestimate the importance of security first, especially as Matt was talking about. You're talking about data, and whether if you are using cloud solutions, right, making sure that you are, you know, certainly prioritizing security is some of my thoughts top of mind here, Vivian and Yair.
Thank you so much, Eva. Yeah, what about you? What are some best practices you've seen so far?
Yeah, I think that you know, just connecting all these pieces here. Matt and I had a little chat before we got started today on the MCP revolution that I think is coming, and I think that's going to be a big change. And just thinking about how AI is going to affect this whole integration space, I'm excited to see what's there. I think we've all learned that you have to take one step at a time with AI and not just pull it in. There's a lot of false positives when it comes to these type of new technologies. But I think ultimately there'll be a lot more standardized protocols that you can pull and push data from in the world in general, which will, make our lives a lot easier. And I think that suddenly the collection of data is going to be the less hard part at some point. And it's actually what you do with that data is a lot more important. And that's where we spent a lot of time is the, what we call actionable analysis. So, we've spent a ton of time in actually leveraging AI today, a little bit less on that collection side right now, but more on, building out automatic outputs here from remediation plans to risk registers and things like that to enable organizations to really operationalize their entire kind of risk and compliance program here, doing the same things they've done before, but with a much smarter kind of, AI brain in the middle of it. And I think that ultimately that's where the value is going to be created more is, how you take all that data and then turn it into something that's palatable. And I think Matt also mentioned before about the millions of data points that are coming in here. And honestly, that's going to explode now, right? With AI and with just everything being connected more and more and online. And, the world is shifting to this place where the amount of data, risks, and even compliance, right, is going to go through the roof now, even on AI itself, right? Think of, a year and a half ago, there was no AI compliance. There was no AI risk management. And that's probably the most important, risk and compliance topic right now in the market. So I think that, we're in an interesting space that I think is not going away anytime soon. It is a little bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy when it comes to just, kind of expanding its own market by creating more and more challenges that we'll have to address as we go forward. But I'm excited about the integration piece because I think that there are some big breakthroughs that we're working on now and other teams are working on that will make our lives much easier to bring in a lot more data into our platforms.
Thank you
I
all
think
for all
that
the
was a really
insights.
interesting point on the AI frameworks, and it is probably, the new AI frameworks are probably one of the highest sought after that we are seeing recently, for sure. And enterprises are asking about that as well. So as you're going through diligence, right, enterprises want to really understand what are your policies, procedures, how are you managing the use of AI really in your systems? So.
Well, since we are talking about AI now, why don't we jump into our next questions? It's also about AI and the role of AI in compliance automation. So we all see that AI is redefining how compliance evidence is collected, analyzed, and validated. So there are so many use cases around AI when it comes to compliance automation, as well as some other cybersecurity areas as well. So, but then at the same time, we see that many organizations remain cautious about fully delegating compliance decisions to machines because of concerns over, like we talk about accountability. Now, it's also about explainability, accuracy, and regulatory trust. So they do have concerns when using AI. So my question is, what role do you think AI plays in advancing compliance automation, and how can organizations build trust in AI-driven decision-making when we are embracing this AI? So, yeah, why don't we start with you first? I know you talked a lot about AI just now. What's your view on this?
Yeah, I think that the AI's role here, like I mentioned before, is going to be front and center here. And I think that at the end, in the near future, at least, I don't think the human is going to be removed from this link. If anything, they're going to become more important at the top here to validate and oversee what's going on here. But it's a little bit like our airplanes, our cruise liners, and our cars that are slowly becoming smarter and more self-sufficient. At the end, you still have to have somebody there that can make the most important decisions there and ensure that mistakes aren't being made there. And I think that's, a good analogy to, the market that we're moving into now where, there'll be a lot more capabilities that AI can provide here when it comes to compliance automation and the ability to, collect information and analyze it. And, just the references before of even taking screenshots and taking those visual layers now and making sense of it, right? Because there's suddenly somebody who can see pictures and make sense of that. That's all great. But at the end, you're going to need somebody who's going to sign off on this because the implications of getting it wrong here are huge, right? Getting it wrong from a compliance and regulatory perspective could be huge fines to crazy lawsuits to just reputational or direct business and financial damage to the organization. So, we're in a space that, when AI broke out and this whole, vibe coding came out and everybody started talking about how the world of software is going away. I had a little bit of a different approach, and I think that's really what's happening, which is that while there's great, capabilities being developed on that, engineer level now, and to help them do better, maybe even replace the lower level engineers. At the end, I think there's a lot more work at the top now because there's so much more data, right, and so much more to oversee here to make sure that we're getting it right. And maybe I'll just end on the fact that part of what you need to do is to put in different checks and balances in your AI solutions here, from sometimes owning the LLM in-house there and making sure that you're controlling that data so it's also secure and safe, but then also running it through multiple models sometimes, and then having a human at the end that signs off on certain things and certain elements. So maybe you don't reduce 100% of the work, but you can reduce 90% of the work, and that's amazing, right, if we can get to that level there.
Thank you for the insights. Eva, what about you? What's your perspective on this?
Yeah, I love everything that Yair just shared. And certainly AI is, an essential part of our strategy. As an assessor and a compliance automation platform, I mean, the use cases for us are not only creating efficiency for our auditors who are actually reviewing those screenshots and, having to make, have opinions about the evidence before they make certifications, but also on the customer journey and the front side, right? The customer side, the whole customer journey. And so for us, certainly AI, the areas are, the sweet spots are things like extracting and validating evidence, for example, from unstructured data, right? Mapping the controls across all frameworks, generating predictive insights that helps teams stay ahead of the risk, right? Rather than chase it. And I think, where we're seeing huge gains, at least for us, is pre-screening, what we call first pass AI. So it reduces these QA bottlenecks. So you're going into an audit, whether it's an internal audit, an external audit, right? And so we can improve that, real-time reduction in manual hours spent on repetitive tasks. And so, but, back to Yair's point, this manual check is still so critical, and having this human in the loop is an essential part of how we've built our platform. And I think today the manual check, right, when you look at some of the governing bodies, the ISO certifiers, the AICPA, is still considered more trustworthy, I would say, than the robot. And that's understandable, right? It's familiar, it's what we've been doing, but certainly we know that will shift, and the AI-driven validation will certainly become the gold standard over time, right? It's faster, it's more consistent. We have a term of at ThoroughPass, where compliance should be verifiable, right? Verifiable compliance is sort of at our core. And so the other way to do this, to answer your question, and to achieve scale, is through AI and cross verification between the AI systems, right? That's how we can build integrity and objectivity into our processes.
Thank you so much for the valuable insights. Matt, what about you? How do you see the balance between automation and human oversight evolving?
Yeah, I think Yair has it right in that we're not going to replace the human. We're going to make the human more efficient at the end of the day. And there's lots of examples. The systems we use actually reason responses and drops those responses in as it answers the assessment, for example. But now a human has to review that response. Now, what we see is pretty accurate responses, way more accurate than a traditional self-assessment, by the way, right? Because it's looking at the documentation, it's actually reasoning a response. Let's drop it in there. But then we give the human the ability to review it and override it, which is going to exist, right? We see the same thing with the evidence collection bot. We actually created a live stream viewer for clients to actually see what the bot was doing. Because again, you have to build trust with these systems, right? So we have to give them the ability to see what the bot's doing. It attaches the evidence, you get the screenshots. We pull all that together in a way that it's building trust of what the systems are doing. And as you build more trust with these models, humans will just allow them to be like, okay, I get it. I've reviewed hundreds of these. It's more accurate than I am. I'm going to let this stuff go. That's where we'll get the efficiency gains, but it's not eliminating the human. It's just making them way more efficient. And I think that's the opportunity we have in front of us with all these different AI capabilities. We use multiple models to review and validate and collect data and do the things that we do. So it's not going to be one AI system. It's going to be multiples, and it's giving the ability to bring back as much context as possible from these systems, so the humans can go, yeah, that makes sense. I'm going to go, and then we just continue to scale out, because that's where organizations will struggle, right? We see a lot of clients, and I bet even Yair see this as well. Like, just the manual efforts just kill an organization, right? And now we're adding 50, 60% efficiency, and we probably get closer to 85, 90% eventually. That's a huge gain over what most clients see today.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I just want
Yeah.
to chime in on that. I agree. And when you think about what you shared earlier, Vivian, like on the challenges that CISOs face, right? They're just the regulatory burden's high. There's just more and more threats. And their budgets, and there's a lack of resourcing as well, right? So there's a shortage of like professionals. And so where do you allocate your budgets, right? It's really difficult. We need to be able to really deliver these efficiencies so they can manage the risk appropriately, right? And use these solutions to lower the cost of these more mundane tasks and focus on the strategic areas of the business.
It's clear that, from all the insights, it's clear that AI definitely adds real value when it comes to improve efficiencies. There are so many use cases around AI, but Matt, I totally agree with you. We need to build trust when having these AI systems, when delivering this to the customers, and also I think you mentioned about having the human element in the role. I think that's also very important. So now I would like to hear your thoughts on how organizations can take this a step further, shifting the perceptions of having compliance more as a cost center to a driver or strategic value. Because traditionally, compliance has been seen as a necessary cost to the business. But I guess, as we discussed earlier, we have seen that automation is enabling organizations to turn it into a true strategic enabler to enable a lot more use cases around it. So my question is, how can compliance automation evolve from a cost center into a strategic enabler that really drives efficiency, transparency, and real-time risk quantification? Eva, why don't we start with you first? I know we talked about efficiency, but how do you see the evolutions of compliance automations on this?
Yes, I think the evolution, continues in a lot of the ways and how we've talked about. Like, one of the ways that I see it evolving as an enabler, and I touched on this earlier, is that with the limited resources, with the higher regulatory bar, in order to become an enabler, right? We can see companies, and I run across large enterprises every day who are trying to evaluate, can I enter this particular market, right? And so what are the regulatory requirements of that market? Do I have the baseline controls that are required there? And so by allowing companies to manage their compliance obligations with more efficiency, with the real-time compliance monitoring, better predictive insights, managing the risk, they can then focus on how do they grow in those markets? How do they enter new markets and do things at scale and do it more repeatedly and with more confidence, I would say. And so I think that's the part that, for me, I think about as you think about how do you create this as a growth enabler and a strategic enabler for a company, really opening doors and allowing companies to grow in areas that perhaps they couldn't historically grow. And we're seeing just the rise of tremendous, you want to operate and you want to be a healthcare company in France, and you need a very specific certification to do so. And so by creating a common control framework, by real-time monitoring, it really can open doors for companies to expand their footprint.
Right. If we were to take from a different perspective, Matt, what's your take on linking compliance automation to risk automation and quantification?
Yeah, I think it's an important part, right? Is we think about compliance in a vacuum. We shouldn't. controls, mitigating, compensating controls are driving my risk posture, right? So one of the things that I think is really important here is that we're not just talking about compliance automation. We're also talking about kind of near real-time risk quantification, which gives us better insights into where the risks of the business are. So I can, again, Eva said this earlier, prioritize the right budgets, right? If we're not taking that compliance data and tying it into our risk postures, we actually don't have the information we need to do that prioritization, right? And so I think the beauty of compliance automation is also allowing us to do more real-time risk quantification on the other side and helping the business make decisions faster. It's not once a year we get to do this exercise. We could be doing it daily if we want to. On the other side of this, right, I think the important part from Eva's perspective earlier, not only new markets, but think about sales enablement. A lot of us get vendor reviews as vendors, right? How do we use automation to optimize getting those surveys back, getting those questions back to enable the revenue side of the business, right? We have lots of clients that get literally hundreds of surveys, vendor review questionnaires every month. If we can use automation to help them speed up the answering of those questions, to get those answers back, guess what you're doing? You're speeding up sales. You're speeding up business. You're not a cost center anymore. You're actually a business enabler. And I think that's the opportunity. The other opportunity we have with automation is to use it to actually drive our sales team to close deals faster. And that's a real competitive advantage.
That's a good insight from another perspective. Yeah, what about you? What's your thought on this?
Yeah, I'm not going to repeat what was said. I think I agree with a lot of what was said. I think that the enablement piece would take a little bit of a different, take at it is that it's there today already. I think that the enablement piece is there. I think that the market has shifted to a place where large organizations are requiring these certifications, these best practices, and these regulatory compliance, right, levels being met as a part of their contract today, and you're not going to close business with them. So it's very simple. It's just like if you don't have insurance there, or if you don't have proper, governance in other areas, and if you don't have some kind of AML program in place, or anti-bribery, whatever it might be, you're just not going to do business with these companies. So I think the enablement part has already shifted. We've seen the rise of companies like Vanta and Drata and some of these other compliance automation platforms that have gone wild on the lower end of the market, which even just proves this point out, which is that even tiny companies have to meet these requirements today. Otherwise, they just can't operate. So I think the business enablement part has already shifted, and I think a lot of the senior leadership is realizing that already. And I think the opportunity comes from the Matt and even mentioned before, which is beyond the fact that this can enable business, there's actually, additional areas that you can leverage here for efficiencies in your program that would reduce costs even to some extent, right? Which is, are taking a lot of money today, by linking it to the risk program here, and by even think about just the reduction of risk that you're creating, that's then lowering that exposure of lawsuits, of actual incidents happening here, and the amount of money you can lose for those things, which can be quantified as well with different financial models. So, I think that at the end, the enablement part's there, and now it's really, organizations at their fingertips kind of to take advantage of that. And if you're not there, you really can't operate in the tech space almost at all with any large customer at this point if you don't have a certification or proper kind of risk and compliance program when it comes to security in place.
Totally agree. I think by leveraging automation can definitely see customers, organizations, they are able to have, for example, enable business expansions in new market, like Eva mentioned earlier. I think Matt bring down a good point around the risk quantifications, sales enablement. I think, yeah, you have a, closing thoughts around, since organizations have this baseline of enablement, now what they are going to do with that to achieve further or better outcome. So that brings us to another important area, the power of ecosystems and partnerships. I know Eva briefly talked about partnership earlier, but now we want to see how the evolution of compliance automations giving rise to far more integrated, far more interconnected ecosystem. Because we really see vendors in the space, they are now cooperating closely with not only auditors, but cloud providers and consulting partners as well to expand compliance coverage and deliver more integrated audit-ready solutions. So my question is, what partnerships or ecosystems do you see is going to shape the future of compliance automation, and how can those collaborations deliver greater customer value? Matt, why don't we begin with you first?
Yeah, there's two types of partners I see being important to continue to drive out these capabilities. One, Eva mentioned it earlier, you need good partners on the more on the solution services side of the house, right? You got to remember a lot of these programs are built by the consultancies, right? And so you need good partners on that side because they are the ones trying to design and build out some of these programs for clients. And so that's one part of the ecosystem that you need to have relationships with, right? And we all probably have our kind of preferred partners that we use to help us go to market, that because they are designing these systems. That's one side, right? On the other side, it's really about these data source partners, right? Where is the ecosystem to build out the integrations and some of the things that we do from a telemetry perspective, right? We focus on solutions that give us a lot of policy and configuration data, right? It's funny, a lot of clients will come to us and say, hey, can you integrate our vuln management data? Yeah, that doesn't really move the needle from a compliance perspective. Like at my hand, it might give you like 5 controls. That's not your biggest bang for the buck. Your biggest bang for the buck is your security configuration management tools, your cloud security posture management tools, your endpoints, like a lot of policy configuration data. So we prioritize a lot of our partnership on the ecosystem side is those types of vendors that have a lot of configuration policy data because it's going to provide the most value in an automation story, right? And get that data brought into the mix. And that's kind of how we look at it. We've got our service partners on one side, and then where are our top technology providers that we need to build integrations with and kind of coexist in the ecosystem.
Eva, what's your take on this?
Yeah. So very similar with a different spin, obviously, given, what we do. But, when we think at ThoroughPass about the future of compliance automation, it really all comes back to the audit and how well we can connect what happens every day inside an organization to the final audit outcome. And I think right now, audit consulting integrations are still pretty fragmented, I'd say, which means there's a huge opportunity, right, for deeper, more productized collaboration. That's exactly where we're focused. We're approaching, compliance automation as an auditor that's also built robust software capabilities. So it's a dual perspective, really, that helps us create a tighter linkage between what I mentioned earlier, which is what you do every day, your daily control execution, and your audit outcomes. And reducing, obviously, rework and cycle time. But, the partnerships and ecosystem, right, is critical. So like Matt mentioned, like ISV and the cloud world, continuing to embrace that open APIs integrations really allows us to have end-to-end visibility across the risk and compliance and security, and ultimately through your audit, right? Customers don't want another silo, right? They want everything to work together seamlessly. And so, I think the service collaboration is also key, and partnering, like you mentioned, Matt, is also what we firmly believe, right? With consulting and delivery experts and helping really operationalize controls into, complex enterprise environments.
Thank you, Eva. Yeah, what's your view on this?
Yeah, I think we all have a similar view, so I'm not going to repeat here either. But I think that at the end, on the services side, I would say that we take a little bit of a different approach here in terms of, partnering with service providers like MSSPs, for example, and advisories and consultancies that use the centralized platform more as like a delivery tool, so that we can serve a lower part of the market that we don't target directly ourselves, because we're a little bit focused more on enterprise today. But we see a lot of usability for our platform. And if we can just get this in the hands of, smaller clients, there's a huge opportunity through MSSP partnerships. So we're working with, some of the largest kind of consulting, advisory, and, MSSPs in the world today to get this out to more of the masses there. Obviously, when the integration side, was mentioned here, so I'm not going to repeat. I think we're all integrating with a lot of similar partners there. So that's very exciting. And I very much agree with Matt that the integration is a little bit of a buzzword in terms of integration and tools, and then the devil's in the details at the end. You have to really understand which integrations are going to move the needle for you and are going to give you an actual bang for your buck here, and focus on those. Because if you're going to integrate a solution, especially in the enterprise world, right, where that integration is not just plug and play, even if it's supposed to be, it's never like that, right? Then you're in a situation where if you can then help answer 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 controls, that wasn't worth the effort, right? Because you could have done it much faster and maybe even more accurately just by asking somebody to go check it for you. So you always have to find that balance there. And then maybe the last partnership I'll mention, which wasn't mentioned, which is an area that we focus a lot, because we focus a lot on how do we take our solutions out to the market, is we're looking at a lot of the AI players when it comes to, getting our content out there and our research out there. We do a lot of research on the industry there. We put out tens and tens of pieces of content on our website a month, and we have a lot of visibility to that. And part of that is coming through a lot of good partnerships that are kind of sharing more and more knowledge out there, which I think is a great thing the world is moving to, which is with AI tools and just the ability to get to data much quicker now. You suddenly have this kind of expert at your fingertips all the time, instead of just guessing and making things up and hoping for the best there, from an outcome perspective.
Oh, wonderful. I think we understand that collaboration between different partners. We mentioned consulting partners, auditors. We mentioned about some of the partners that ingest data to the platforms, help to deliver most value to the automation story. And also, you mentioned about AI players. That's also another interesting observation. Now, we are almost at the end of our session, so I have one final question for each of you. So with all the insights shared today, what's your one final advice to CISOs when they assess and evaluate compliance automation platforms? Yael, why don't we start with you first? What's your recommendation to CISOs?
In terms, I couldn't hear the question fully, so can you repeat that?
Yeah, so what would be your one final advice to CISOs when they evaluate and choose compliance automation platforms?
Yeah, so I think that my advice to CISOs would be not to think about the compliance automation as a point solution, and much more as a building block into a strategic program that they're building out that will serve them not just tomorrow or next month, but in years to come. And I think when you see this as an investment also, and not a very expensive relatively investment, but just a way of thinking about the problem in a more of a strategic way, because just like we mentioned before, like the AI risk didn't exist a year ago. And let me tell you what risk doesn't exist right now that will exist in the years too, like robots, for example, right? Nobody's talking about that now, but there'll be robotic kind of, risks that are going to literally take over the AI piece and be the most, the biggest risk in the 2-3 years from now, and self-driving cars. So if you're not building blocks into a platform that is sustainable and scalable over time, that can adjust and adopt, and you don't have to rebuild the entire architecture around your GRC platform, then I think you're gonna at the end have a lot of solutions that are not going to talk to each other, and you're gonna have a very fragmented, inefficient program there. So my words of advice is to think about building a strategic platform at the core here that you can build on over time, finding a partner that is building and innovating in this world. And then Matt mentioned earlier about just some of the players out there, and the legacy players, I think it's hard for them. And it's not hard for them because they don't have enough developers or because they're not large enough, because they're much larger than all of our organizations actually. It's hard for them because they went down a path for 10, 20, or 30 years, and now to pivot out of that path is basically impossible. And they're trying very hard, and some of them are building new platforms and new versions. But at the end, you can't just pivot over to a new technology and move everybody over overnight there. And there's things at the core that are not going to ever be scalable. And that's why I think when you think about this, it's all about scalability and maintenance over time.
Right. Eva, what would be your key recommendations to CISOs?
I think Yair hit the nail on the head. It was going to be very similar to what I was going to suggest, because what we find is, like, piecing together all these fragmented solutions is part of the problem, but you need to start with a strategy and create a compliance tech stack and avoid like all-in-one promises is what I would say, because sometimes what we'll find is, you know, a CISO or a company will be talking to a vendor and they want to solve all their problems. And that's not necessarily the best solution, right? It's creating a strategy and creating those building blocks that are ultimately going to get you efficiency and really thinking about their team, their impact to their teams. And I'm not saying they aren't, but really identifying those workflows, right, that are consuming the most time and prioritizing those to free those cycles, but then creating, you know, the building blocks for really the future and how everything will work together over time. But, you know, start small and continue to build.
Right. Matt, any final thoughts from your end?
Yeah, keep it simple. Quality over quantity. What do I mean by that? It's not about the number of connectors or systems you support. It's about the quality of those. We've seen a lot of clients struggle with other solutions that say they have hundreds of connectors. They don't work, which drives me to my last point, time to value. If you can't get value out of these systems in 30, 60, 90 days, run away fast. And I mean that because you're going to see a lot of the legacy players try to lock you into multi-year deals because they can't prove value in the first year. You really need to see how quickly you can get value out of these systems before you get locked into these multi-year deals. That's the sales technique of the legacy players right now, because they know they can't prove value. So I would say it is about ease of use and time to value. And it's not necessarily about the number of connectors you have. This stuff has to work for you.
Thank you for all the insights. I think we definitely got some key points here, key takeaways. Matt, you mentioned about time for value. That's the one thing that CISOs you need to have in mind when evaluating compliance automation. I think Yale also mentioned about seeing compliance automation not as a point solutions, but focus more on continuous innovation. Eva, you also mentioned about start small, but prioritize on continue building the block for compliance automation. Now, thank you, Eva, Matt, and Yale for those closing thoughts. It has been a fantastic discussion on how automation is transforming compliance from a regulatory obligation into a strategic advantage. That's it for today.